Piers has donated a magnificent painting to support the work of Professor Fred Hollows, and Piers' painting will be auctioned at the Eltham Gallery near Melbourne on Sunday the 24th of May at 2 o'clock. I wish I were a rich man. This painting is a beautiful evocation of the landscape near Piers' home at St Andrews. It's one of those quintessentially Australian gullies of dry grass and elegant thin eucalypts and wattles, and when you look at this painting you get that warm ache of affectionate recognition. But it's a big painting, so I'm telling you all of this to give you time. If you're thinking of putting in a bid, you'll need to clear a space on the wall. And here's Piers Bateman. Now you can speak. Piers, why did you choose that one to give to Fred? I think of all the paintings in the exhibition, that's the one that I find most attractive.
Oh, really? Well, actually, that painting was painted in stages and photographed during each stage for an article I was writing for an art magazine. And as such, I thought it was a particularly interesting painting.
So what, it's a how-to-do-it demonstration for would-be artists, isn't it?
Well, magazine sort of tends to encourage this sort of demonstration, but I wrote in my foreword to the article that my paintings never really turn out the way I expect them to. I'm always looking for the change in direction. If the painting suggests a particular avenue, I'll follow it, and I was trying to show that painting is basically abstract. Whether it's recognisable at the end, it still goes through an abstract process. And by photographing the various stages, it can be demonstrated that the painting holds together through an abstract composition, and each area is related to the other by colour or movement, tone, etc.
It doesn't look abstract to me at all, in that I recognise it instantly. So, what do you mean by abstract?
Well, I think people often talk about paintings being real, or realist paintings, and they'll point to an apple that you can almost touch.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's really only paint on canvas, so it's an illusion, and there's an abstraction of an apple. I mean, it's just colour and light to suggest it. And actually, if you pour red paint on a canvas and call it red paint on canvas, it's much more real than a painted apple. So I think all painting is abstract. It's just degrees of abstraction. And I think the only variation is whether it's immediately recognisable. But usually, even in abstract paintings, there's use of hieroglyphs to relate to the human experience.
Piers, the largest and the most spectacular of the paintings at the exhibition is a painting of a Western Australian landscape. It's predominantly red, with spindly trees all over it and a ruler straight horizon, and it's from a slightly aerial perspective, as though viewed from a low-flying aeroplane. And I believe that there are stories attached to this particular painting.
Well, I've made many trips to the outback, and I've always been rather limited, having a conventional car, and I was always itching to get into some of the country I could see, but I didn't venture into. So I approached Western Mining a couple of years ago, and they agreed to fly me to one of their exploration camps in the Great Sandy Desert, which is inaccessible excepting by a four-wheel drive convoy or by air. And flying from Kalgoorlie, I could view the landscape from approximately 5,000 feet, and you get that fantastic expanse. The desert unfolds like a carpet, little tracks and waterholes and dried up salt lakes and spinifex and occasional old mining scars.
I think any artist who can make something magnificently beautiful out of a landscape which is dead flat has obviously got some special insight into the character of that landscape. That would painting the landscape with the ruler straight horizon would seem to me to be the most difficult of things to do.
Well, I think when you've got all paintings have various techniques of composition, and when you get a horizon so flat, as you say, well then I make a point of that. The painting is based around that definite division between land and sky, and from the air, it gives a perspective that's not broken by any trees because of the height of view, and so the horizon is definitely straight, and it goes on forever. And I actually called the painting When the Flat Gets Flatter, because when you leave Kalgoorlie you couldn't imagine anything more flatter. until you get into the air and you see that it just spreads on forever into infinity.
In one of your flat horizons, you've magically caught that glow that you get just above the horizon. There tends to be a dividing line between the horizon of the land and the sky, and there's this thin strip of glowing light that separates the two. And I think you might be the first artist I've ever seen who's actually caught that curious phenomenon of the Australian landscape.
Well, as you know, when you travel through the Australian landscape, you get a mirage effect on the horizon very often because of the angle of view and the heat coming from the horizon, and also it's a sort of an artistic device to suggest land going on and dissolving because it goes on and over the horizon, and especially that yellow you're talking about is something I remember very clearly from flying into Australia at night time, and as the dawn comes up you just get this little glow on the eastern horizon as the sun starts to spread its rays over the countryside.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about yourself. You have told me that you shared a bassinet with Kim Beazley Jr.
Well, my mother told me that.
He went on to be a very enthusiastic minister for war, but I believe that you fled the country to get away from it.
Back in 1966, my term was coming up in the national ballot, and as you know, we didn't have a vote in those days, and I was very active in the anti-Vietnam movement as a student, and I took my option to leave the country, and I travelled to London ostensibly to study art at the St Martin's School of Art.
You must have been the last refugee to leave the country by ship, I feel.
Well, actually, on the ship I went on, funnily enough, there was Roger Kemp, a well-known abstract painter who recently died, though I didn't know him at the time, and another young artist, Joel Ellenberg, who I shared a cabin with.
So when you arrived in London and turned up at the school where you wanted to study painting, what happened?
Oh, it was quite funny. I got a job in Piccadilly, and so I could go to art school at night time. And at 5 o'clock when I knocked off, I raced down to Shaftesbury Avenue to enrol, and there was this enormous queue. It just went on forever, and we shuffled along for about 2 hours, and then as we came inside of the doors of the St Martin's Art School, word started coming down that life drawing was full and painting classes were full, and unless you wanted to do hairdressing or interior design, there was no point in staying on.
But you were lucky because you fell in amongst the mega-talented Boyds.
Yeah, actually, I knew the Boyd family vaguely from their contact with Eltham, and I rang up David Boyd, and he's a very generous man, and I asked him if he could give me a reference after looking at my folio with the idea of applying for a job with the BBC as a stage painter or some art-related job, and that was unsuccessful. Though he introduced me to his brother Arthur, who gave me some work in his studio, and so I
also gave you your first painting commission, didn't he?
That's right. I asked him if he had any work, and he said, "I've got a painting job for you," and I couldn't believe what he might be suggesting until I went round there, and he had a 4-storey Georgian house in Highgate, and I had 2 months' work painting that. But the interesting experience for me was Arthur's is a very traditional craftsman, and I had the opportunity when I was working for him to actually make paints from basic ingredients, and this gave me a good insight into the traditional craft work in oil painting.
So he did teach you?
No, not teaching me to paint, but he showed me how to actually make colours from pigments. We used to make cadmium colours from pure cadmium pigment, beeswax and linseed oil, using some antiquated machine I think his grandfather gave him.
Piers, I've been aware of your work for a few years, but in your letter to me, when you were telling me about your life and about the exhibition at the Eltham Gallery, you described yourself as an invisible artist, or now you say, now as an artist I am invisible. What do you mean by that?
Well, it was a very funny story. Andrew Peacock tried to buy one of my paintings, and he wanted to contact me, and he rang up the Australian Arts Council, and they had no record of me, and he had a lot of difficulty in tracking me down. And
was that because you'd never asked for a grant?
Well, that was one reason, but I was quite surprised because I'd exhibited widely throughout Australia. I've had over 30 exhibitions at the time, And then I realised that officially I was very much a low-profile painter.
Before you became well known and your paintings were saleable and saleable at a reasonable price, how did you support yourself? I mean, were you working at a job and painting at the same time?
Well, when I came back from England, I brought back all the paintings I'd done in England, which was about 50 student works, and I mounted an exhibition at my parents' home in Eltham and presented it in normal gallery way with invitations and a bit of cheese and red wine, and it sold reasonably well. Actually, one of the paintings recently came up at Joel's, which I was quite surprised to see. And
sold for many times the price that you got for it in the first place?
Oh, of course, yeah. But that was 20 years later. Actually, I was very surprised. I would have never believed when I painted that painting that it would have had such a career.
How do you feel about that? I mean, there has been a suggestion, and from time to time somebody will comment on this and say that it's really not fair to living artists, that they get no benefit from the capital appreciation of their works, and that there ought to be some way that artists can retain an interest in their work for as long as they live and can benefit from the capital appreciation. Is that possible, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I really... it's an old question, and an answer that Taz Drysdale gave to the same question. He said basically artists don't paint for money. It would be an administrative nightmare. And is the artist going to be responsible for the devaluation of their works?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because yours won't devalue. But what made you decide to give this beautiful painting to Fred?
I listened to an interview you had with him regarding his poetry CD, and I was so moved by the generosity of this man that I thought that was the least I could do. I actually rang up the program the same day and made that offer. Well,
it's a beautiful gift. There is no doubt about it. A magnificent painting. So those who have a large space on their wall and are prepared to make a generous donation to the work of Fred Hollows in return for owning this beautiful painting, then it will be auctioned at the Eltham Gallery on Sunday, the 24th of May at 2 o'clock. And it's the work of Piers Bateman, and Piers' exhibition is on at the gallery at the moment. We've talked only about Piers' landscape paintings, but there are also a number of paintings which he has made of artists performing at the Montsalvat Jazz Festival. So, very fine piece of work, and congratulations. It's a beautiful exhibition, Piers.
Thank you very much, Terry.
And thank you for your time.
Not at all, thank you.
And that's it for the program for today. I hope you can join us.